As quilters, we love color. And generally we have favorite colors, those special colors we want to put in all our quilts, our signature color, the color that makes us happy. And what happens to the rest that we don't always get to use? Well, that was my dilemma, and I have a solution for you. I'm Leah Louise from Inspired Quilting by Leah Louise, and purple has been a difficult color for me. It's not that I don't like it, but I just never quite knew how to use it in a quilt. So I've determined in these last few months to use more purple, and I've come up with some really great ways to use a color that can be challenging. And this quilt is going to be fantastic for any and every color that you have. This is my Enchanting Paths quilt hanging behind me, and you've seen it in a couple different colorways. But what I did here was a little bit different. I took a color that I have a challenge with, and I know I do because that's a lot of the fabric that's sitting in my pile, my waiting pile, my stash, saying, use me, use me. And so I thought, okay, I can do this. And I had some blues that I really liked that had some purple tints to them, and found some prints that worked really well alongside both. And then it was looking so springy, I thought, oh my goodness, we have to add some yellow and pink. And before you know it, I've got this great, wonderful quilt. And of course, check out those low volumes. That batik print with the purple and the blue worked perfectly in this quilt. And I love the other subtle low volumes mixed in. But do you see that diagonal that goes across this quilt? That's what really sets this pattern apart. It creates a really great design, and it'll be fun to quilt with. I already have some ideas of how I want to finish this. But let's go ahead and get started. I want to show you this quilt. I will go ahead and link this pattern as well as the videos to the other 3 quilts so you can see what this looks like in a multitude of colors. It's a fun pattern, and I know you're going to love it. So let's get started. But first, please subscribe, and don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you enjoy this quilt. Thanks so much for being here today. I love getting ready for a new quilt because that means I get to choose fabrics and put them together and see how pretty it's going to look and what I want to do. And I had these fabrics in mind when I bought this piece. This is a batik, and it sort of has creamy golden yellow backgrounds with purples and blues and various shades of all those colors. And I love how it goes with these. I thought that's going to be really pretty. And I bought this intentionally to use up a bunch of the purples. And so I thought I want to use this with my low volume fabrics. And I wanted to choose this pattern, the Enchanting Paths. And the link's below if you're interested, but I've done this in other colorways, and I want to do it with a stronger low volume. And in pastels for a spring quilt. I think that'll be beautiful. But notice how you get strong diagonals depending on the colors and what you use in your 4-patch. So when I'm thinking about my 4-patch, these obviously are going to be the larger blocks, and this will be my 4-patch. And my goal was to have this as the diagonal. But look at that. There, it doesn't contrast enough here. So every time I looked at this, I walked away and I said, no, this won't work. I went and I loaded the dishwasher and I came back. No, went and washed my hair. No, that's not working. What am I going to do? So I said, okay, something's got to change. And what do I take out? The piece that I chose to begin the quilt from the very start. And look at what I found. I pulled this out. How perfect is that? It has a light background, so it's going to contrast against these low volumes. Because you notice out of these low volumes, sorry, I'm just reaching all over my sewing area here. These low volumes, I took all the whites out. And I just wanted to use some creamy colors and batiks because I wanted that tone to follow along with these, because there's not really any stark whites, but there are some creamy colored tones, and that's where I wanted to go. And I also thought it would work better with the first background that I chose, but it's going to work even better with this because look at that, it's white, almost white, and it's going to stand out great against all these beautiful colors. So I'm really excited about that. And it works wonderfully with the blues and purples. My gosh, I couldn't get a more perfect match. So that's the new plan. And sometimes you think you have a plan and it doesn't feel right, and you just need to take a few minutes, step back and look at it and go, what don't I like? What's missing? What am I struggling with here? And try a few different options here and there, and you'll be surprised what a difference that'll make. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I'm ready to quilt. And the best part is my hair is washed and the dishwasher's running. Yay! This quilt is primarily a charm square quilt because the 4 patches are all made out of charm squares. But because they finish at 4.5 inches, the solid blocks in between need to be cut at 4.5. Now, if you buy charm squares, your 5-inch squares, then you just need to trim them down. But I have a lot of fat quarters. So these that are already cut into 5 inches that I'm going to use, I'll cut down to 4.5. What I do is I'll take a fat quarter. Now you've probably seen my video how to cut fat quarters for quilting, cutting them into pre-cuts. And generally what I do is I'll take my fat quarter and I'll cut it along the 20-inch length to get 4 5-inch squares. And you can get a total of a dozen 5-inch squares out of each fat quarter. But in this case, we're going with 4.5 inches. So we're going to cut from the opposite direction because 4.5 inches and 4.5 inches equals 9. And 9 inches equals 18, which is the width of our fat quarter. So I can get 4 of my 4.5-inch blocks from the width, and I can get about 4 of them along the distance. So I'll have 18. Now, depending on 18 inches. Now, depending how long your fat quarter actually is, you might be able to get a 5th row, but depends on how big your quilt is, how many you want. I'm only going to cut enough for what I need for this quilt and maybe 1 or 2 extra because I mostly use 5-inch, not 4.5, and that's just going to be for this quilt. So that's the first thing I need to do is cut all my focal fabrics, the primary color fabrics, the prints that I'm going to have into 4.5-inch squares. Now, I have the low volume already cut into 5s, and we're good there. So what I'm going to need to do is cut my background into 5-inch squares. Now, this quilt takes, I think, 224 4.5-inch blocks, whether it's one of our focal fabrics or a 4-patch. So I'm going to need 112 of these together out of all these prints. So I'll count up how many colors I have, divide that by 112 and see. So that's probably going to be 3 or 4 per color of what I'm going to use. And then the background, I also need 112, but I need 56 of the low volume and 56 of the contrast or background, whatever you want to call it. So for 56 5-inch squares, I'm going to cut it out of yardage. And that means as I'm cutting across my fabric, it measures 42 inches wide. And I'm cutting a 5-inch block, so I can get 8 blocks per row, which is 40 inches, and that'll give me an extra strip along the end. So if I get 8 per row and I need 56, that's 7 rows. And 7 rows at 5 inches each is 35 inches, so 1 yard of background. So you can do this with fat quarters, you can do it with yardage, whatever works for you. I'm updating the pattern to include instructions for this variation. This is a slightly different size quilt than the original pattern. They're both going to be in the same pattern, but I'll show both because what I prefer doing with this is piecing it in a 4-patch to put the entire quilt together. So we make the mini 4-patch, then we make a 4-patch with all this together, and then assemble the quilt that goes together so much quickly. And I just had to change the dimensions a little for that to work. So next step is cutting fabric. I've got a bunch of blocks to cut. Then we'll make our 4 patches. Then we'll make our bigger 4 patches, and we have a quilt. This is going to go together really easy. I love it. I've been busy doing some sewing and getting everything put together. What I want to show you is how we get from our 5-inch squares to a 4-patch. So the first thing we do is we take two fabrics, a low volume and then a background, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam along each side. I think this is probably the easier one to see. And we have a 1/4 inch seam on both sides. Make sure they're on opposite sides and not in a corner, because what we do next, once these are sewn together, is we're going to cut them at 2.5 inches. Now I have a 2.5 inch ruler, which makes it quick and easy, but this is all you're going to do. And you see I have a stack of them here. And when you open these, you're going to get a two-piece. It's like a mini rail fence of sorts, but essentially we have 2 strips of fabric sewn together. Now we're going to take our next one and do the same thing and cut that at 2.5 inches. And when I press these, what I'm doing is pressing everything towards the batik. It doesn't matter which you choose as long as everything is consistent. That way your seams are going to nest along the way. Now we're going to put these two together like this. We want our prints, our batiks, to be in opposite corners. That's how we're going to get our diagonal. So we want it to look like this. We don't want it to look like this. Okay, see that difference? We need to flip it around so it goes this way. So then the next step is we put these together and we sew down the sides, just like this. So we have this center seam and it goes across the center, and we're going to cross over that seam as we sew. So what I want you to make sure is when you're sewing this, we're going perpendicular to the seam, not in line, not parallel to it, because we're not going to get our cross. What we need to do is line this up right here. Now, because we have already pressed our patches to the batik side, when we flip them around and put them right next to each other and line up that seam, those seams are going to nest very easily. See how we've got that there? And then you're going to sew along both sides, just like this. And then once you get here, you're going to do one more cut at 2.5 inches. And now you have a 4-patch. And again, you just want to pick one side and just press everything, because now we're going to sew and assemble our quilt. One thing just to notice is when you do this, these blocks come out opposite. So where this corner's here, that corner's there. They're not going to exactly duplicate each other. So from here, we're going to go ahead and sew all these. We're going to press them open first and then put 2 together like this, sew down the sides, cut them apart, and then we get to this point. Now once we're here, we're going to make the larger of our 4-patch, and that's how we're going to assemble our quilt. So what we want to do is make sure we place these all in the same direction. In order to get our diagonal, we want to make sure that these are all going in the same direction. Now I'm going to put all 4 of these over here in one pile. What I like to do is separate my fabrics into piles as I'm getting them ready to sew. That way I just have to choose off the top of the pile and I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about what comes next. So I'll divide these into 2 piles. Remember, we have a total of 56 of each of these. So together there's a total of 112. So we're going to divide these into 2 piles of 56 blocks. And then we're going to divide our focal fabrics into 2 piles. Again, we had started out with 112, divided into piles of 56 so that the fabrics aren't the same. In my case, I mixed it, or divided it pretty much between the lines of blue and yellow. Excuse me, blue and purple, and there's a little bit of yellow in this one. So now as I sew this, I'm going to be able to just pick up this 2 and put them side by side and sew this down. And I have the first half of my block there. I'm going to come down. I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to sew this piece right over to that 4 patch, do the 1/4 inch, and now I have a 4 patch ready to go. Once all these 4 patches are finished, then we're going to do the final assembly. But by creating this larger unit, it's going to make the final assembly much more quick to finish. So one other thing that I do want to show you is as you're sewing, if you have a lot of the same fabrics, don't sew them to exactly the same ones. Mix it up a little so that every time we see this fabric in the quilt, it doesn't have this same pair next to it. I like to have it mixed up a bit more than that. So as you're picking up and you're sewing, oh, I can put that one aside. You know, here's a different one. Maybe it's this one, and we can just pick up a different one. And then that way you don't get too much repetition, and you get a better balance. And things that are repeating too often are what will stand out to the eye and be more visible to pick up. So once we get to this point, this is an easy finish. So we're going to press these, get them ready to go, create our 4 patch. And what's wonderful is notice there's no matching seams. The only seam we're going to match is right here in the corner. So it doesn't matter where these fall. Let's say like on this one, see how this one, the seam didn't end up exactly correct? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on here and I'm going to pretty much just center it. And then I can tell right where I need to be. That was a little larger. That's okay. I'm going to sew it here. I'm going to use my seam allowance to align along that edge, and everything's going to be beautiful. So this is a quick and easy way to go. I'm going to get my quilt together here, get all those 4 patches, and then I'll show you the final construction of the quilt. With all my larger 4 patches completed, I have put my quilt together using the chain stitching method. So first I created my blocks with blues and purples, and again there were a mix of colors, so the blues contained anything that had blue in it, even sometimes yellow, and the purples sometimes had pink. So it just depended on the color range, but the key was not to have this color in both piles. So as I'm piecing my 4 patch, I have distinct fabrics in each section, and as I'm picking it up, that just helps assure that I don't get duplicates, and I don't want to have the same fabric in each of these corners within the same block. So that's how that worked. And then come through, and again you nest your seams right here in the middle, and it works beautifully. You get this center corner, then when you come in, you sew your first row together, and you come in and get all these seams to match. You do the same here, and you just work through. Now this is a, let's see, 14 by 16, but I made it into a 4 patch, so it's a 7 by 8. And to me, a block this, oops, there's a block here. This size block is much easier to handle than to have all these little ones. I find this more difficult to get the colors where I want them. Not that this is particularly set in any particular way, other than this 4 patch allows me to equally distribute my fabrics more easily than just doing them singly, because I'm constantly looking the row before, the row after. This way, it really, you've got that space already built in between your colors, and it helps. The big thing when you're putting this together is to watch your diagonal. If you are going to use your diagonal as a focal point in your quilt, which I am, which is why I used all the same colors, make sure that you put them in the pile in the correct order. They all need to be going from top to bottom. Otherwise, they'll be going every which way. And that's fine, because if you look at a couple of the other quilts in this pattern, actually there are a total of 3 other quilts I've made. And I'll put those links down below so you can take a look at those videos and just see what they look like. But I changed them around a little, or I even changed the color so that it breaks it up a little bit. But in this case, I wanted to keep it continuous, and I'll probably quilt this with a darker blue or actually a blue variegated thread. And I think that'll be really pretty. And then just do something a little kind of loose through these blocks. So I'm excited about that, but I do want to show you what this looks like when the seams are all put together. I really, really like this quilt. And it's finishing, I think it's about 63 by 72. So it's a really good lap size, you know, kind of a double lap. And just the way the colors just all work together. Very spring, I like that. But for me, it was about using up some lavender fabric and get the lavenders and purples taken care of. And I really like how it turned out. This is a fun fabric that I've had, and I've used it for many years. I obviously bought a lot of it because it just works with so many different things, but it carries a lot of colors. It adds some interest. And of course, I like my batiks and then these watercolors and just some great prints. And it just keeps the quilt very interesting to look at and lots of colors. So there we are. This quilt is looking gorgeous. I'll finish up those last couple rows and we are good to go. I love it. It looks fantastic. I hope you enjoyed this pattern. It's been a lot of fun for me. The quilt turned out great, and I hope you have an opportunity to make your own. Go grab some fabrics and get some low volume and see what you can put together. It's been my pleasure to share this with you today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.